Spider-Man Reign 2 Issue 3 tells us that Peter is responsible for everything, so let's cover that. So it starts off in the last issue where we find out that Venom is MJ. And in issue 3, MJ tells us the story of how that happened. You see, Eddie Brock was going to get revenge on Spider-Man via MJ, but when he followed her home, he saw the same thing she saw. Peter had taken himself out. And obviously this crushed MJ to her soul. So much so that she developed pure hatred for Peter. With this hatred inside of MJ, she was the perfect host for Venom. And so what did MJ do next? She gathered all the villains and drove all the heroes out of the city and pretty much imposed peace with force. Now we gotta go to the OG Spider-Man reign to connect the dots. In the OG series, we find out that Mary Jane died because every fluid in Peter's body was radioactive. And I mean every fluid. So Mary Jane dies from radioactive poisoning. Now back to the new series, when older Peter first got to this timeline, he was searching for MJ. We find out from MJ herself that this isn't the first time that Peter has been back to this timeline. But MJ says every time he comes back, things get worse. So with all of Peter's enemies at her back, they obliterate this old man and tell him to never come back.
But wait, there's more.
So we know that Miles is working for Kingpin, but we find out why. Well, Miles pulls up and tells us that the older Peter killed the Peter from this timeline. So Peter killed this version of himself so that MJ wouldn't die from radioactive poisoning. But also, do y'all remember this web protocol from the original Spider-Man Reign series? The barrier that pretty much has millions of dead bodies behind it? Well, we also find out from Miles that this is Peter's fault too. With him going back in time so many times, he created something called the event, which ended up destroying the world. Kingpin used the web protocol to save Manhattan, and he hired Miles to stop Peter if he ever went back in time. For some reason, Peter keeps forgetting that he's going back in time. This is why they had him in this machine in the beginning of the new series. This machine puts him in an endless fantasy, but the fantasy always gets corrupted and he ends up escaping. And he repeats the cycle of going back in time again. But even after finding all that out, Peter still wants to save Mary Jane. Now, I think there's more to the story that we'll find out later that might shift some of the blame to another person, because there is no way that this is all Peter's fault. But with Spider-Man Reign being so dark, it very well might be. So I will be keeping track of this series, and if any more developments come up, I will let you guys know.